What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fan? This your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast network and channel, giving a shout out to the rest of the crew: Shad, Kelvin, KB Film Room, Big Dog Talk Sports. That's right, that's right. Everyone who's tuning in, thank you for supporting Behind the Bench. Subscribe to the channel, help make the show the best that it can be, and we all wish you a happy new year for 2025. That's right. That's right. Let's talk some NBA history. I come across a lot of content on social media of fans and non-fans alike covering 80s, discussing 80s basketball. And what behooves me is I've never seen a situation where there's so much discussion about an era of sports that occurred 35, 40 years after the fact. I've never seen a phenomenon like this before, but nonetheless, it's taking place. And a lot of this conversation, focuses on whether, a team was a super squad or not. And now, according to the revisionists, any team that won a championship in the past on 160 games, that was a super squad. And I kid you not, I come across this type of dialogue on the daily. But what's funny is what they may not realize, the term super team did not exist during those years. It did not exist because we had all-time championship teams. And I'm going to begin a feature series on those historic teams of the 80s. And I will be talking about every squad who won a championship in that decade. And I figure by being a fan of the Los Angeles Lakers, I wanted to start the series shedding light on the Lakers of the 1980s, who won 5 championships over the span of those 10 years, and earned the right to be called the team of that decade, to where they went down in history as a dynasty. This was a team that achieved something that had not been done in 19 years. Win back-to-back championships, and they achieved that feat in 1988. First time since the 1969 Boston Celtics went back-to-back during their historic run of the 60s. And I think it's important to note what a super team has been shown to be. It is a roster that consists of 3 superstar franchise players, particularly in their prime. They join forces. And to do that, because it shouldn't even be possible naturally to be able to bring forth such a squad. So in order for that to happen, a few things need to take place. The salary cap has to be manipulated. Young talent needs to be cast aside. And more often than not, you may have to trade for one of those superstars by giving them multiple draft picks to make that happen. And then to fill out the rest of the roster, you often rely on veteran-laden players, beyond their prime, who agreed to sign on for the vet minimum or the league minimum. That's not how teams of the past, championship teams, were built. And a perfect example of that are the Los Angeles Lakers of the 1980s. And the seed for that success actually started 4 or 5 years ahead of the fact when the Lakers acquired Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in a blockbuster trade that occurred 5 years after he played for the Milwaukee Bucks, drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, led them to a championship in his second season, along with Oscar Robertson in 1971. And then he was traded to the Lakers in a 4-player deal in 1975. And then they would start the process of what would become known as the team of the 80s, drafting Norm Nixon. I believe that was in 1977, and drafting Michael Cooper in 1978, 1979. And then eventually they would bring in one Irvin Magic Johnson, the first pick of the 1979 draft. And they was able to acquire that draft in a trade that occurred 3 years prior involving Gail Goodrich, drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers. And he was traded to the Jazz, the New Orleans Jazz. And in return, they received a compensatory first round pick, which they eventually used to draft Magic Johnson with. And then a couple of years later, they would draft James Worthy, number 1 pick of the 82 draft. Then they would acquire the rights to draft Byron Scott in 1983. And then 2 years later, if I'm not mistaken, they drafted A.C. Green in 1985 out of Oregon State. Scott was drafted out of Arizona State. Worthy was drafted North Carolina. Michael Cooper, I believe he was drafted New Mexico State. And during this run, the Los Angeles Lakers really only had one bona fide 6-man that was known for scoring, and that was Bob McAdoo, who played for the Lakers approximately 4 seasons. And up until 1985. Now, we know Bob McAdoo was a legendary player, former scoring champion during his prime years. I believe he was a 2-time scoring champion when he played for the Buffalo Braves. But once you really study the Los Angeles Lakers, they really didn't become what was officially known as Showtime Lakers until after they drafted James Worthy. Now, James Worthy was selected in the same draft as one Dominique Wilkins. Now, just think, they could have drafted Dominique Wilkins, who historically is viewed as the greater player, and Wilkins, better known as Neek, became a franchise cornerstone for the Atlanta Hawks, a tremendous basketball player, one of the greatest scorers of all time. And many eyes, he's viewed as the greatest in-game dunker in history, along with the Vince Carters of the world, the Michael Jordans of the world, players of that ilk. But management in the front office, in particular, Jerry West, GM, the late, great Jerry West, who created and built Showtime Lakers, he decided to select James Worthy because he felt he would fit better with the team. And that's an example of how important scouting is in building a championship squad. That's not how super teams are built. A super team, when you have 3 superstars willingly choose to join forces, you don't need scouting for that. And then if you can handpick your players to fill out the rest of the roster, you don't need scouting for that. So that is a primary distinction right there in of itself. And if you look at Showtime, by the time they drafted A.C. Green, the Lakers featured the same starting 5 for the next 5 years. Magic Johnson was the point guard. Byron Scott was the shooting guard. James Worthy was the small forward. A.C. Green was the power forward. And then Kareem was the center up until the point he retired after playing 20 years in the NBA. He retired in 1989. Now, before that, they drafted Kurt Rambis around 1981. And he became their power forward up until the point where AC Green earned that starting position at the 4 spot. So you see the consistency throughout this team's run. Now, of course, they may have brought in a player here and there, and that, all teams, another characteristic of a championship team back then, historically, or even up to the 90s and 2000s, even if when they won a championship, they still drafted players. They still drafted players to keep the team moving forward. Also, as I mentioned, once Bob McAdoo retired, and when he did play, coming off the bench, he gave us about 13, 14 a game, somewhere around there. But we had nobody coming off the bench averaging like 18 points a game. That's like considered an elite 6-man as far as scoring. They didn't have nobody like that. They had reserves, excellent reserves, who fulfilled a role on the team, whether it was defense, such as Michael Cooper. Michael Cooper was a defender extraordinaire. And he won Defensive Player of the Year in 1987. Right? Also, he and Magic Johnson popularized the alley-oop dunk play, which they coined the Cooper loop. Right? Okay. They had nobody coming off their bench averaging 18 points a game. And by the time Showtime completed the heart of their run, they really only featured an 8-man rotation. The starting 5, Michael Cooper, Kurt Rambis, and then Michael Thompson, who they brought on to the team for the 86-87 campaign, and he played approximately 5 to 6 seasons for the Lakers. And they brought him on board to help out with the rebounding as Kareem would start to age and get older. That was the primary reason. He was not asked to come on and provide scoring off the bench. That was not his role. See, this was a team that specialized in everybody playing a role. Offense, defense, passing, energy, bringing energy off the bench, hustle. That was Kurt Rambis' role. Hustle, keeping the ball in play, getting those tough rebounds, contributions that don't show up on the scoreboard, but they're intangibles that contribute to winning. Okay. Also, if you look at the team, by the time the Lakers won their 3rd NBA championship by finally defeating the Boston Celtics, right? For the first time in championship play, they didn't feature nobody on their team that averaged 25 points a game a season. And actually, when the situation called for, Coach Pat Riley, who led the team for 9 seasons, one year he called on Magic Johnson to lead the team in scoring, to be the primary scorer. And he did so during the 86-87 season, where the Lakers probably had their best season during the Showtime years, finishing with a record of 65-17, won their 4th championship, and Magic would go on to win his first ever league MVP. And then the following year, they called Byron Scott's number to lead the team in scoring, averaging about 21.5, 22 points a game. Magic, the year he led the team in scoring, the first time, he averaged about 23.9. And by the time Magic Johnson, James Worthy, and Byron Scott made their last finals appearance together in 1991, James Worthy led the team in scoring that year, if I'm not mistaken, around 21, a little over 21 a game. So you didn't see Showtime Lakers feature 3 players averaging 20 points a game at the same time. They weren't built like that. That's a myth. That's a misconception. And as far as the standard, how the standard was during the 80s, a player like James Worthy, who's a first ballot Hall of Famer, I believe he was selected to 7 All-Star. He made 7 All-Star appearances, but game in and game out throughout the course of the regular season, he was not viewed as a superstar player. Now he had a reputation for performing and rise to the occasion in big games. Thus, they dubbed him Big Game James. But he was not viewed as a superstar according to that standard back then. So what I'm saying is, this was a team that, as they say, one for all, one for all. One for all for one. That was led by a head coach who demanded that they play at the top of their game pretty much at all times. Also, he made sure that they were the best conditioned basketball team in the league because, they featured the fast break attack better than any team that's ever did it in league history. And to do that, you have to be in tremendous shape. And James Worthy, whether it was a 3-on-2 fast break, 2-on-1 fast break, he ran that lane probably better than anybody we've ever seen in a fast break situation, consistently throughout the course of 48 minutes. So what I'm saying is, it was about roles. It was about understanding what it is to become a champion. And a lot of these revisionists, they don't understand the difference. Also, a super team has a short lifespan. They may only roll for about 3 years tops before they start to crumble because they're not really built on a true foundation. It's more of a manufactured build than an authentically, or what some people would say, organically built team or a traditional laden built team. Real championship laden teams can sustain a run approximately 7 to 8 years. And in the case of Showtime, they carved out a 10-year run of dominance, which allowed them to go down in history as a dynasty. See, it's the difference. Real championship teams have such an impact on basketball that they are long remembered years after the fact. 20 years after the fact, 30 years after the fact, 40 years after the fact. We still talk about the 72 Lakers that won 69-13. That was an all-time championship squad. Or the 60 Celtics that produced a dynasty for the ages. Or the 70s Knicks. The 90s Bulls. The Kobe and Shaq Lakers. You remember those teams, man. They go down in history, for their dominance and long-standing run, as well as the many playoff battles they had to overcome to achieve victory. So when I look back at Showtime, I don't see a super team because there was not a super team. It was led by a head coach who demanded excellence. And those teams could not rest on their laurels. They could not take anything for granted. A super team, when it's built, when you're taking 3 superstars, when they all play in the same conference, well, you essentially destabilize an entire conference. So therefore, you pretty much have it on lock. So you can give games away during the regular season because you realize that seeding will not matter come playoff time. There's a major difference. The mentality is different too. Because it comes down to, more often than not, which superstar will outplay the other superstar in the championship round to hoist that trophy by the end of the season. And that's why Magic Johnson was such a tremendous leader, because he elevated everybody's play. He truly made everybody better on the court. He brought that winning attitude to the franchise. It wasn't a situation where he was in his prime and then he joined forces with Kareem and Worthy. That's not how that went down. That's not how that went down. So I can sit here and say, you know, I had the privilege. I love the NBA. I enjoy the NBA today. But those 80s, that proved to be what is known as the golden era, the golden age of the NBA. And that's why you had, you know, many slogans that were born out of that decade. NBA is fantastic. Why we love this game. The competition was memorable. You had so many superstars during that time. You know, they understood what it meant to represent the jersey, represent their team, represent the city, represent the league. It meant something. It meant something. But when it comes to the Showtime Lakers, they were not a super squad. They were an all-time championship team that proved to be recognized deservedly as a dynasty. Thus, they are well known and is well deserved as going down in history as the team of the 1980s, the golden age of the NBA. That's how great they were. That's real greatness, man. I'm telling you. And their achievement and their success, you know, it stands and lasts to this day, you know. And like I say, a super team lacks that. It lacks that presence. A super team does not stand the test of time. It's like a flash in the pan. No sooner you snap your fingers, it feels like the whole experience is over. But Magic, Kareem, and Worthy always go down in history together. You know. But I just want to break that down. Like I said, in closing, in review, Showtime was primarily built through the draft outside of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was a fixture of the team 4 years before Showtime really kicked off, before the decade of the 80s started. And to continue to build on the foundation, they drafted players. They drafted key players that fit their style of play. That's where scouting is premium. A super team, you don't need scouting. You do not need scouting. And that's why often they miss the mark. And that's why often they lose more than they win by season's end. And when the Lakers did lose in the finals in the 80s, they lost to another all-time championship team. And those teams I will be featuring as I continue this series to kick off the new year of 2025. Magic, Worthy, Scott, Green, Kareem, Cool, Rambis, Thompson, McAdoo, Mitch Kupchak, former GM of the Lakers. You know, it was a beautiful time, it was a beautiful decade, and Showtime went down in history. So I just wanted to drop that nugget. This is JB for BTB, Behind the Bench.